The fog was a living thing. It clung to the cold gray skin of the USS Bodega Bay, a Fletcher-class destroyer that had seen too much war and was now limping its way across the North Atlantic in the quiet, uneasy spring of 1945. For Lieutenant Commander Michael Corrigan, the silence was louder than the gunfire he'd grown accustomed to. The war in Europe was over, the great Nazi machine shattered into a million pieces. But out here, in the vast, indifferent ocean, ghosts remained. German U-boats, the wolves of the sea, still lurked. Some hadn't received the final order to surrender. Others were crews of fanatics who refused to accept defeat. The call from the sonar room was a jolt of raw electricity through the ship's weary soul. "Con, sonar, got a contact, bearing 075, range 9,000 yards. Sir, it's deep, and it's quiet." Corrigan leaned over the talk tube, his knuckles white. "Quiet, Chief? Define quiet." The voice crackled back, tinged with disbelief. "No engine noise, Commander. No screws turning. It's just there. A solid return, the size of a Type 9 U-boat, but it's moving at 5 knots. Sir, it's impossible. It's like a whale made of steel." Every man on the bridge knew the fundamentals of submarine warfare. A submarine was a machine of noise. The constant hum of diesel generators, the churn of electric motors, the rhythmic beat of the propellers, these were its heartbeat. A silent submarine was a dead submarine, drifting to its eternal crush depth. But this one was moving. "All hands to battle stations," Corrigan ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is not a drill." For 2 agonizing hours, they tracked the Phantom. It moved with an unnatural grace, holding its depth and course with unnerving precision. It made no attempt to evade, no attempt to attack. It simply moved east, a silent black needle stitching its way through the deep. Corrigan felt a primal fear creep up his spine. This was wrong. This wasn't warfare. It was something else. Then the impossible happened again. "Con, radio, receiving a surface transmission. It's in clear German, sir. Unencrypted." "Put it on the speaker." A voice, calm and educated, filled the bridge. There was no panic in it, no desperation. It was the voice of a man making a business appointment. "An das amerikanische Kriegsschiff. Hier ist U-Boot 234. Wir haben keine feindseligen Absichten. Wir möchten die Bedingungen für unsere Übergabe besprechen. Bitte antworten Sie." "He wants to discuss terms of surrender," the ship's translator confirmed, his eyes wide. Corrigan grabbed the microphone. This was a trap. It had to be. A silent submarine broadcasting in the clear? "U-Boat 234, this is United States warship Bodega Bay. You will surface immediately with your deck guns unmanned and your crew on the foredeck. Do you comply?" The reply was immediate. "Verstanden, Bodega Bay. We will comply, but we request you maintain a distance of 500 meters. Our cargo is sensitive, and our crew is not well." The black shape that breached the waves 20 minutes later looked both familiar and alien. It was a U-boat, but its lines were smoother, more hydrodynamic than any Corrigan had ever seen. There were no rivets, the steel plates fitting together in a seamless dark gray skin. The conning tower was blended into the hull, and most unnervingly, there were no deck guns. Where the formidable 105mm cannon should have been, there was only a flat, featureless expanse. As promised, a group of men shuffled onto the foredeck. They looked pale, gaunt, and strangely listless. Corrigan, watching through high-powered binoculars, felt a chill. They weren't starving, but they looked drained, as if the very life force had been leached out of them. Corrigan led the boarding party himself. The air on the U-boat's deck was cold, and it hummed with a low, almost subaudible vibration that he could feel in the fillings of his teeth. The German captain, a man who introduced himself as Kapitänleutnant Werner Richter, met them at the hatch. He was a tall man with hollow eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. "Welcome aboard, Commander," Richter said, in flawless, unaccented English. "We have been expecting you." The interior of the U-234 was even more disorienting than its exterior. The familiar stench of diesel oil and unwashed bodies was absent. Instead, the air was sterile, with a faint scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Wires ran in thick, insulated bundles along the corridors, but they weren't connected to a diesel engine room. In fact, there wasn't one. "Where are your engines, Captain?" Corrigan's executive officer asked, his flashlight beam dancing across banks of what looked like enormous glass batteries filled with a softly glowing, silvery liquid. Richter smiled a tired, knowing smile. "We do not require them, not in the traditional sense. Our power source is novel." But it was the central compartment, a reinforced, lead-lined chamber where the torpedo room should have been, that held the true purpose of the U-234's voyage. Bolted to the floor in a cradle of complex machinery was a massive bell-shaped object, about 12 feet high. It was made of a dull, heavy metal that seemed to absorb the light, and it was covered with cryptic symbols and wires that led to the strange batteries. A low, resonant hum emanated from it, the source of the vibration that permeated the entire vessel. "What is this?" Corrigan breathed, his hand instinctively going to the pistol at his hip. "My government gave it many names. Project Cygnus, the Glocke, the bell. It is the reason we are surrendering to you, and not the Russians. My orders were to take this to Japan, but with the Reich fallen, my final duty is to ensure it does not fall into Stalin's hands. What you have done to Hamburg and Dresden is warfare. What the Soviets would do with this is an ending." Within hours, a communications blackout was imposed on the Bodega Bay. A coded, eyes-only message was sent directly to the Chief of Naval Operations. Before the sun set, a fleet of American warships was converging on their position. The sick German crew was taken into custody, not as prisoners of war, but as something else, spirited away by men in dark suits who arrived by seaplane. The U-234, now manned by a skeleton American crew, was escorted under the tightest security to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire. It entered a closed-off, guarded dry dock, and, to the rest of the world, it simply ceased to exist. Lieutenant Commander Michael Corrigan thought his part in the strange affair was over. He was wrong. It was just the beginning. 2 years later, the world was a different place. The Cold War had cast its long, chilling shadow across the globe. Corrigan, now a full commander, was pulled from his desk job at the Pentagon and flown to a location that didn't officially exist, a sprawling, hidden facility in the vast, empty deserts of Nevada, codenamed Site Mercury. Waiting for him was a man who seemed more like a ghost than a person, Dr. Aris Thorne, a German physicist who had been spirited out of Germany under the auspices of Operation Paperclip. Thorne was thin, with a shock of white hair and eyes that burned with an intensity that was both brilliant and terrifying. He had been the chief scientist on Project Cygnus, He was the man who had built Die Glocke. "Commander Corrigan, the man who pulled my child from the sea, please come." Thorne led Corrigan into a cavernous subterranean hangar, and there it was, not the U-boat, but the Bell itself, now suspended in a massive gantry crane, surrounded by a dizzying array of modern American technology. Scientists and engineers swarmed around it like priests tending to a dark god. The low hum was still there, a constant, menacing presence. "We have made progress," Thorne explained, his hands gesturing with nervous energy. "The U-234 was merely a transport. Its power source was a crude, temporary application of the principles. A battery, you would call it." Their first major test was in 1958 in a patch of ocean so deep it was named the Hades Trench. The goal was modest: generate a stable torsion field and execute a controlled, short-range jump, not through time, but through space, a micro-teleportation. Corrigan stood on the bridge of the submerged Cygnus, the air thick with the now familiar ozone and the deep hum of the Bell, which was housed in its lead-lined chamber behind him. Dr. Thorne was at the control console, his face bathed in the green glow of oscilloscopes. "Field is stable at 97%, Captain," Thorne announced, his voice tight with anticipation. "Coordinates locked, 1.5 kilometers, bearing 000, on your mark." "Engage," Corrigan said, his heart pounding against his ribs. The hum intensified to a deafening roar, the lights flickered, and for a fraction of a second, Corrigan felt a sensation of profound dislocation, as if his body were being pulled apart and reassembled atom by atom. The ship groaned, the metal of the hull screaming in protest. Then, silence. The deep, resonant hum returned to its normal level. A young ensign at the navigation station gasped, "Sir, look at this." Corrigan stared at the chart. Their position had shifted, instantly. They had moved exactly 1.5 kilometers to the north. There had been no travel time. One moment they were at point A, the next they were at point B. They had teleported a 2,000-ton submarine. But the success was tainted. 2 crewmen working near the reactor room had vanished. They didn't fall, they weren't injured, they were simply gone. In their place on the steel deck were 2 faint scorch marks, like photographic negatives of their shadows. And for days afterward, sailors would report seeing ghostly after-images of the 2 men, walking the corridors, performing their duties, before fading away like smoke. Thorne had no explanation, muttering about temporal echoes and the unpredictable cost of manipulating the universe's fundamental laws. The project was deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable for direct military application. The risk of creating a paradox or simply erasing a battleship from existence was too high. Project Cygnus became a thing of whispers, a black-budget phantom that officially didn't exist, its funding hidden in a dozen other programs. It became America's deepest, darkest secret. Until October 1962. The world held its breath. Soviet ships carrying nuclear missiles were steaming toward Cuba. American warships formed a quarantine line. The 2 superpowers were eyeball to eyeball, and the fate of humanity hung on who would blink first. In the White House, President Kennedy and his advisors were flying blind. They knew the Soviet ships were coming, but they didn't know if they carried tactical nukes for their own defense. They didn't know the exact mindset of the Soviet captains. They needed perfect intelligence, something no spy plane or satellite could provide. In the dead of night, an urgent, encrypted order reached Site Mercury. Project Cygnus was being activated. Corrigan, now a grizzled captain with more secrets than years, once again took command of the USS Cygnus.
Its mission was not to fight, not to engage, but to do something far more daring. It was to use the Bell's spatial temporal distortion abilities, not to jump, but to create a bubble of warped reality around itself, to become a ghost. They would sail straight into the heart of the Soviet fleet, submerged and invisible to sonar, radar, or the naked eye. They would be a phantom, listening. Deep in the Sargasso Sea, the Cygnus engaged its system. Inside the submarine, everything was normal, but outside the hull, the torsion field generated by the Glocke was bending light and sound around the vessel. On the sonar screens of the Soviet destroyers and the American carriers hunting them, there was nothing but empty water. Corrigan piloted his impossible ship right alongside the Communist, the lead Soviet freighter. They were so close he could have hit it with a rock if he could open a window. Through their advanced listening devices, they picked up everything: the chatter of the Russian crew, the reports from the engine room, and most importantly, the encrypted communications between the ship's captain and the Kremlin. They heard the frantic orders, the confusion, the fear. They learned, crucially, that the Soviet captains had no authority to launch their missiles. They were mules, not warriors. This vital intelligence was relayed back to Washington via a secure experimental communication system that utilized quantum entanglement, another byproduct of Thorne's research. Armed with this knowledge, Kennedy could stand firm. He knew the other man's hand. He knew Khrushchev would have to be the one to give the final order, and he was betting he wouldn't. The world was pulled back from the brink. No one ever knew the role the silent, invisible submarine played in those fateful days. The heroes of the Cuban Missile Crisis were the diplomats and the politicians. The crew of the USS Cygnus remained ghosts, their victory recorded only in a file so secret that even most presidents would never know it existed. After the crisis, the project was deemed too powerful to ever be used again. The potential for disaster, for a paradox that could unravel reality, was a price too high to pay, even for absolute security. The scientists had seen glimpses of things in their experiments, flickering images of alternate futures, echoes of wars that never happened, and dark, empty voids that suggested possibilities far worse than nuclear annihilation. Dr. Aris Thorne died in 1971. On his deathbed, he confessed to Corrigan, by then in Rear Admiral, his greatest fear. He didn't build Die Glocke, he said. He had reassembled it. The original schematics, he revealed, had been found in an archaeological dig in the 1930s, etched onto metallic plates buried in a place that predated any known civilization. The Nazis, and later the Americans, hadn't invented a new technology. They had simply resurrected an ancient one, a key left behind by someone else. In 1975, Admiral Michael Corrigan oversaw the final mission of the USS Cygnus. It was taken to the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. Its nuclear reactor was removed, its systems were overloaded, and the Glocke was programmed to engage one last time without any containment. There was no explosion. From the surface, the support ships registered a massive, instantaneous energy spike, and then nothing. The USS Cygnus vanished from sonar. It didn't sink. It was just gone. Erased from the physical world. But the story doesn't end there. The technology reverse-engineered from Project Cygnus didn't vanish. It dripped out into the world, secretly and deliberately, through defense contractors and shell corporations. The strange alloys that could withstand temporal stress led to the development of materials used in stealth bombers. The microcircuitry designed to control the Bell's unstable matrix became the foundation for the first silicon microchips. The quantum communication theory became the seed of the Internet. The rapid, almost exponential technological leap the world took in the late 19th century was not the product of simple innovation. It was the echo of a stolen thunderbolt. And sometimes out in the lonely places of the world, strange things still happen. Commercial pilots flying over the Pacific report seeing a ghostly gray submarine cruising on the surface with no wake and no flag before it fades from view. Deep-sea research vessels occasionally pick up a sonar contact that is moving impossibly fast and is silent. They call them glitches, sensor ghosts, tricks of the light. But a few old men, in the twilight of their lives, know better. They know that the USS Cygnus is still out there. It didn't sink. It didn't jump through space. It simply slipped its anchor in time. It is a ghost ship sailing an eternal ocean, its crew of temporal echoes forever replaying their missions, a silent, eternal guardian born from a secret war, forever carrying the key to a door that humanity was never meant to open.